first one is Myoshin Kim, who is a lecturer at the Ehwa Women's University of the Korean National University of Arts. She took a BA in Korean traditional music theory from the Seoul National University, and then an MA and a PhD in ethnomusicology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa.
This paper examines the characteristics of Koreanized Christian hymns that utilize Korean traditional music, focusing on the Hanguk Chansongga, or Korean Hymnbook, published by Dongwol Church in Seoul, Korea. Since the introduction of Protestantism to Korea at the end of the 19th century, Protestantism and Korean traditional culture have been regarded as not just unfriendly to each other, but even mutually incompatible. Protestantism has grown rapidly to become the second largest religious group in South Korea today and has been an influential agent of change in Korean music culture. Western-style church music has dominated the church. Nevertheless, since the early 20th century, there have been some attempts to create Koreanized church music by applying Korean traditional music. But it was not until the 1980s that the creation of Koreanized church music became an active movement, and today it exists as a notable trend to the point of holding Koreanized church music competitions. Various types of Koreanized church music have been created, utilizing many genres of traditional music, including folk song, pansori, the long narrative epic song, jeongga, Korean lyric song, and so on. Jeongga is vocal music enjoyed by the aristocrats of the Joseon dynasty and includes three subgenres: long lyric song, short lyric song, and narrative song. As jeongga is music for professionals, vocal training is necessary to sing it properly. Now, I'll show you a video clip of jeonggastyle hymn in short lyric song style, performed by a member of the Bao Korean music worship team, to give you an idea of what jeongga style hymns sound like. The jeonggastyle hymn was first created at Dongwol Church, a representative church following minjung theology, a Koreanized theology that sees the people or the masses as the main agent of history and further considers the people themselves as God. Dongwol Church created a Korean hymnbook with hymns felt to be in jeongga style and used it in weekly services for more than 20 years. It is believed that the church was the first Protestant church to use Koreanized hymns in its regular worship. In this paper, I first examined the characteristics of Dongwol Church and the Reverend Heo Byung-seop, its founder, to understand the background behind making Korean hymns. Then, I'll talk about the composer and the use of the hymns in the church. Finally, I discussed the characteristics of the Korean hymnbook in terms of notation, lyrics, melody, and rhythm. Dongwol Church was established in 1976 by Reverend Ho Byung-sub in Wolgok-dong, a slum area on the outskirts of the northern Seoul at the time. The church was well known for the progressive works of Reverend Ho, a minjung educator and social activist. Some of the enlightened and even sensational acts of Reverend Ho, which were far different from those of ordinary ministers, became well known through movies such as Children of Darkness and People of Gobang Neighborhood, in which the life of Reverend Ho was described as the pastor sharing his life with urban squatters such as ex-gangsters and prostitutes. He devoted himself to the oppressed and poor, so much so that he eventually renounced his pastoral position and lived as a plasterer at the end of the 1980s. The movies were successful at the time and were considered to be the best at describing the social change and its consequent problems that occurred with the industrialization and urbanization of Korean society in the 1970s and 1980s in pursuit of rapid economic growth. With the success of the movies and other social activities of the church, different groups of people from outside the community also attended the church. Among them were movie stars and directors, and especially musicians who specialized in Korean traditional music, the latter contributing to the creation of Koreanized worship services at the church by making pansori-style sermons and worship in farmers' band music style. However, these attempts were short-lived. As Reverend Ho's principles in founding the church were based on the three principles of a church for the community, a democratic church, and national church, it was Korean traditional music that conceptually captured and expressed the identity of Dongwol Church. Reverend Ho's search for Koreanized church music was in accordance with the minjung cultural movement of the 1970s, which utilized Korean traditional performing arts as its main cultural tools. Although many famous artists and musicians came to the church, they were essentially visitors, not staying long enough to create new hymns together. In 1979, Reverend Ho met with Lee Seung-jae, who aspired to make Koreanized hymns at that time and later became a music director of the church. Lee was originally trained in Western music composition, yet had many years of training in Korean traditional music, particularly Jeongga. The two saw the possibility of creating practical and usable Korean hymns, and Lee Seung-jae began to compose Koreanized hymns to be used in weekly services. On July 8, 1984, a Koreanized hymn appeared in the Sunday Bulletin for the first time, and in the worship service of October 21st in 1984, Korean hymns were sung throughout the entire service. This might have been the first Christian worship in contemporary Korean society ever to have been performed entirely with Koreanized church music. They used sheet music for years, and by the later 1980s, the church published the Korean Hymnbook. Lee Seung-jae taught the hymns to church members every week and was with the church until 1993. Now I'll show you a video clip of church members singing a Koreanized hymn. This video clip is an excerpt from a 2004 documentary about Reverend Ho, produced by the Korean Broadcasting System.
이들은 기존의 교회에 대한 편견을 깨고 새로운 교회를 만들겠다던 허병섭의 생각을 현실화시키는 데 큰 도움을 주었다. 국악을 접목시킨 한국 찬송가도 그중 하나였다. 능력과 권세 모두 버리고 외국곡을 그대로 쓰던 기존 찬송과는 달리 우리 가락으로 친근감을 더한 한국 찬송가.
The church included the Korean hymns in its weekly service until 2004. After that, they ceased singing the hymns and only used hymns from the official Korean Hymnbook. According to old church members, the reasons for not using the Koreanized hymns are twofold. First, they are hard to sing without a music director who knows traditional music well. And second, the lyrics, which describe the hard lives of the poor, do not resonate with them any longer. However, they felt very proud that the church created the hymns and had used them in worship. The Korean Hymnbook contains 42 hymns composed by Lee Seung-jae, and the lyricists are unknown. It is assumed that many of the lyrics were written by Lee Seung-jae and Reverend Ho, while sometimes poems by famous poets were used. The hymnbook displays Koreanized characteristics in 3 different areas: notation, lyrics, and melody and rhythm. Regarding the notation in the hymnbook, jeonggbo, a Korean square mensural notation, is used. The composer said he decisively refused to use Western staff notation because he believed that the feeling of Korean music was expressed best through the Korean notational system. Still, he made a modification to the notation for it to be read horizontally instead of vertically, as in its original form, because people were accustomed to horizontal reading. The music consists of 3 horizontal lines. The top line is for percussion instrument, the hourglass drum. The middle line is musical notes for the pitches, and the bottom is for lyrics. However, it is unclear that notation actually helped the people to sing the hymn better. In fact, in the preface of the hymn book, Reverend Kim Han-jung, who took over the church after Reverend Ho, said, quote, "Actually, we confess that we learned to sing most of the hymns from the composer orally, not by reading the jeonggbo notation," end quote. Considering the fact that the most Koreans grew up with a Western music education, step notation would have been easier for them to read than jeonggbo. The decision to use jeonggbo seems to have been an idealized abstraction that did not match reality. Lyrical themes fall into 3 categories: confession of faith and praise of God, pro-democracy movement and national unification, and the hard life of the urban poor. In the category of the confession of faith and praise of God, a special aspect can be seen in relation to minjung theology. It is interesting to note that although God and Jesus are used in the lyrics, the term Holy Spirit never appeared. Also, the phrase 나의 영혼, which means my spirit and soul, that is commonly found in Korean hymns, is not used. Instead, 내 혼, which means my soul without the spirit, is used throughout the hymn book. Whether deliberate or not, it seems that the removal of the Holy Spirit from the Trinity and the Spirit from a person reflects an idea of minjung theology which seeks to resolve real-life problems with human effort rather than through an interest in spiritual matters. It is noticeable that 11 out of 42 hymns were assigned to the category of the pro-democracy movement and national unification. Lyrics like, quote, "When this fight is over, does a new society come? When that fight is over, does unification come? Sharing and serving, righteousness and the truth, we will follow the Lord," end quote, are commonly found in the hymns. This style of wording is often found in anti-government protest songs from the 1970s and 1980s, indicating the close connection between the church and the social movement of the time. In the category of the hard life of the urban poor, a word appearing frequently is the oppressor, implying the dichotomous view that sees society as both the oppressor and the oppressed. Lyrics like, quote, The heavy winds, snow and rain come. Our parents who work outside get soaked. Their hearts are soaked, end quote, are used. The hymns contain expressions of sorrows and anger toward the oppressor from the people living as the urban poor. The uniqueness of the lyrics is based on the fundamental difference between traditional theology and minjung theology. I believe that minjung theology, although it was not mainstream, was necessary as Koreanized theology to help Christians who had to negotiate a time of social and political turmoil in the 1970s and 1980s. As regards the music, although the composer says that these hymns were composed in Jeongga style, not all of them convey the feeling of Jeongga, which is slow in tempo and applies prolonged tones with a prominent vibrato. As I analyzed the hymns, in only 9 out of 42 hymns could I tell that they were composed in Jeongga style. The rest are either in folk song style or in Western music style applying a pentatonic scale. For the rhythmic patterns and tempo markings, the composer used 14 different indications. In 20 hymns, he created new rhythmic patterns for the hourglass drum accompaniment, and rhythmic patterns from Korean folk music are used for 15 hymns. The rest, there is no indication. Now, I want to show you a video clip from my field research. When I interviewed an old member of the church, I asked her if she could sing Koreanized hymns from a hymn book. Here is Mrs. Yum Won-suk singing a Jeongga style hymn first, followed by a hymn in folk song style. For the Jeongga style hymn, you will hear Mrs. Yum saying, "I made some mistakes here," or "I don't know well here."
모든 사람 날 버려도 주는 사랑 여기 조금 틀린 것 같아요. 주시네 주여 우리가 여기가 잘 모르겠네요.
아라리요 이 곡에 넘으면 살 길인가 저 곡에 넘으면 살 길인가 믿음과 소망 사랑과 요서 우리는 주님을 따르리라 아리라.
As can be seen in the video clip, Mrs. Yum does not remember the hymn in Jeongga style well, but sings the folk song style hymn very well. Musically speaking, it seems that the creation of Jeongga style hymns was not very successful, and this explains why the composer later began to include hymns in folk song style and Western music style in pentatonic scales. To summarize, the Korean Hymnbook, the first Koreanized hymn book to apply Korean traditional music, contains hymns for the socially poor who lived in the rapidly changing Korean society of the 1970s and 80s. It contains an autobiographical account of their lives, their opinions on the socio-political situation at the time, and an anthropocentric confession of their religious faith. Koreanized hymns were used to express the identity of the church as national, democratic, and communal, and they are also a symbol showing the influence of the cultural movement of the time. The attempts to use jeonggambo notation and Jeongga style singing can be seen as an idealized musical pursuit and expression of nationalism without considering the musical ability of ordinary church members. All these ideas and the music making were based on minjung theology, the people-centered Koreanized theology. Although the hymns of the Dongwol Church are no longer sung, the three hymn types are still utilized today. Hymns in folk song style and Western music style with a pentatonic scale have been composed by many and were included in hymn books published by various institutions and individuals. Jeonggastyle hymns are not created as often as the other two types, but as we saw in the first video clip, they are still in use, made into artistic hymns. As a paper presented under the theme of creation, I want to wrap up this presentation by mentioning creativity. During the Middle Ages, creativity was understood as an attribute belonging only to God. In the 19th century, it was an ability only of artists, and has now expanded into a human-centered concept that can be applied to all areas of human activity recognized as an attribute common to all humans. It is interesting to see the divergence wherein the Holy Spirit, understood as a practical agent of creation, is not mentioned in these Christian hymns created based on a human-centered theology. Does creativity belong to God, humans, or to humans acknowledging the Trinity? Thank you.